why did you write this book? Why was this something important for you to write?
Yeah, there's a few reasons. It was, I guess, a decade ago now that the topic started coming on my mind because of a few reasons. One, there was the beginnings of more cultural awareness that we're really having some weaknesses relationally, which have obviously gotten a lot worse, and clearly in the current situation with a pandemic have gotten even further worse. But even back then, there were studies that were beginning to show that people really were lacking close friendship. They might have had some people in their lives, but they would answer, some studies would show that, 1 in 4 people would say they had no one in their life whom they could confide in, which is another way of expressing a close friend. And then I was in ministry at a church and encouraged by a recovery of community, because it's even answering this issue. We need community with one another. But for all the emphasis on community and even getting in small groups and different things like that, I started to notice that, we can really value community and be in groups, but people are still lacking that close relational friendship. And so,
Sure.
Even the one another's of forgiving each other and bearing each other's burdens, that really, there's an element that has to happen in a day-to-day, everyday life relationship with people who know you well. And that can't happen just in groups and meetings. So seeing those things showed me that there's something lacking here. And then really the main thing that happened is studying the Bible. I was studying the book of Proverbs and just came across several statements that were surprising to me because of how profound and pointed they were about friendship as a relationship, not just relationships in general or community, but actual friendship. And then that got me thinking about Jesus and how he says that, greater love has no one than this, that a man lays his life down for his friends, and I have called you friends. And I just realized, I have not spent time thinking deeply about friendship or even relating to Jesus as a friend. And so I started to think about it, started to talk about it. As I talked about others, people kind of had the same reaction. They'd say, man, I need to think about this more. I'm not as good of a friend as I thought I was. I don't think of Jesus as my friend. And so, there just seemed to be this wonderful reality that the Bible speaks of, and it's out there for us, and our current lack and need for it. So just wanted to see if we could bring these two things together and share what God says about it.
Sure, and it's interesting because as I was reading your book and then doing my own praying through the Psalms, I started to realize, this is brought up quite more than I hear it being preached about or even talked about. And it's kind of dismissed sort of casually as, he just calls him friend. And as I was praying through the Psalms, I noticed Psalms 119, verse 63, where he says, I'm a friend to all who fear you. And then later on in the chapter, he says, those who fear you see me and are glad. Like there's a sort of relational aspect to the body. And I went, how come I don't see that? It seems almost to be this abstract thing that we're talking about, but not really seeing it in effect.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, why is that the case? Why do you think that's been happening? Not only in the world, but even in some churches, there seems to be a lack of that.
Yeah, there's probably a number of factors that go into that. I think part of it is that, even with the recovery of community, we can recognize the relational dynamics. It's inescapable when you read the Bible. If you're looking for the lens of community, it's there. God's always created a people for himself. He's after the church. But it really does take some rethinking and reordering of our lives to experience the kind of relational connection that the Bible holds out for us. And so it's, needing to change our lives, really, because there's even community structures of we live far away from each other. We move a lot, a mobile society. Technology can connect us superficially to people, but it can be really helpful maintaining friendships in different ways, but it can really hinder going deep and sharing experiences with each other if we rely on it too much. So I think technology, I think mobility, and then just the way our society is structured affects Christians and non-Christians alike, in that we don't overlap our lives with people as other cultures have them, where, we aren't, you may have school with one group of friends, work with another group of people. You have your neighborhood as another group of people, your church community is a different group of people, and they don't overlap. And you're driving from place to place rather than these repetitive shared experiences with people, which is why some of the greatest friendships in life happen like in college, where if people go to college, they share a ton of time and have overlapping kind of spheres of life with a few
Sure.
people, and it's like a microwave. And so, so I think that's part of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I saw an interview you did, and I heard you go through. There was some you had a few lectures on cultivating friendship and
Hmm.
working on that, and I was really excited as I was thinking about reading something on friendship. I thought, oh man, there's a guy who's writing about this because being a guy. Especially being an African American guy, there's less emphasis on friendship. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to notice this is not something I hear men talk about. And then when I look, I say, okay, I'm having an issue with this. But if I look at women or my sisters, um, they're not having this issue. I don't even hear them having this conversation for the most part. Not that
Hmm.
women don't have that, but is there a particular reason why amongst men that this is seems to not be important to men?
Yeah, I think so. I think, there's several things that, manhood is experienced and understood differently from, or have different emphasis in culture from culture to culture in ways that it can be helpful or harmful according to what we're actually made for. And so I think in America and in the West, really, we've been really shaped by, I mean, there's one sociologist who isn't a Christian, but he made these great observations about how the way in which men expressed friendship has changed even in America since the 1700s, where he looked at all these letters of men who wrote to each other. And today, he says he reads them to his classes, and the students' jaws drop because they're thinking it's got to be sexual because of the
Sure,
affectionate language they used. They'd say, I miss you. I want you to know how dear you are to
sure,
me. I wish. And so, but he said that was just normal friendship without a hint of anything sexual going on back
sure,
then. But what's happened is we've changed our view of masculinity so that we have affection and affirmation, and even aspects of physical touch. We've kind of pushed across the spectrum all the way over to femininity, and we don't have any place for that among men now. And so we're nervous to express those things. And then with just kind of a hypersexualized culture, we
sure,
then now can't hear certain affectionate language without thinking there's got to be more going on, and that makes
sure,
guys even cautious to express those. So in its place, we just fill it with either criticism or sarcasm,
sure,
or even just aggressiveness
sure.
instead of gentleness. So I think that pushes real deep friendship in to a superficial level.
Sure, and I'm glad you brought that up because on page 88 in your book, you said, we honor friends by making affirmation the norm, not criticism. And so, how can Christians balance these two well to avoid toxic friendships? Because I know when I wasn't a Christian, that was the norm. And you're right, that was a way of expressing affection by insulting someone or
Yeah,
saying something that was kind of really the opposite of what you want to say to the person, but it just became a commonplace because of you want to avoid someone thinking something about you, or you don't want to say something that is too close. Like I know in my family, it was sort of for men to hug was like an anomaly. To hear a man
mhm,
say "I love you," we would make a big deal about that. Then the pastor would preach, and he would say, "I love this man over here," and you would go, "Ah!" Like this
right.
was a big, big deal. And I just wondered, how do we balance that
Yeah.
so we can have playful humor with one another, but not forgetting to affirm one another.
That's really good. Yeah, and I think playful humor is a good category because that is different than just incessant sarcasm and cutting remarks, right? Because I used to be very sarcastic, and I would think like it's kind of a way of me expressing affection. It's like I make fun of the people who are close to me, and then someone actually, thankfully, took me aside and didn't do like a criticism of me, but gave constructive, gentle rebuke and said, you know, I want you to know sometimes people wonder what you think of them, or they're, because of the way you say things. And I just remember thinking, I need to think about this. And then I realized, man, yeah, I'm kind of just, I'm not telling people what I actually think about them, and
Sure.
I shouldn't be surprised. So I think we've got a long way to even overcorrect and just being able to look another guy in the eyes, or just people together, and just say what we actually think and feel about someone,
Sure.
in a non-weird, but strong and clear way, and just say, hey,
Right.
here's why I respect you. Here's why I appreciate you. And I've found that as guys do this, they do. We're made for it. We're wired for it. And
Sure.
so it really reaches something deep in us. And so we really can give the gift to people of setting a new tone in the culture around us by
Sure.
doing that in non-weird ways. to
Sure.
just affirm and encourage. And then when there's place for rebuke or something, then it's sincere. They know you love them, and you can
Sure.
say, "Here's something I'm concerned about."
Well, brother, it's interesting because I was talking to a guy, and I'm still working and correcting this in my life because I would look at my relationships and I'd go, how come my friends are not, they don't want to be friends with me? And I would think, oh, probably because you keep insulting them. That's not a good idea. And I was just talking to a friend the other week, and he said, dude, you can't do that so frequently because people are going to they're not they don't understand your intention. And so
Right.
I've been trying to, over the weeks, correct the way that I speak to
Hmm.
people, and even try to find places of affirming people
Yeah.
by at the end of the conversation trying to do something like that. And so I think, what page 89 of your book, you said, we speak clearly but also gently because
Hmm.
we're speaking about our friend. And you
Yeah.
also said, in another place, let me see if I can pull it up here. Uh, you mentioned something similar to that. And I thought, you're emphasizing that a lot. And I know that that's very important. So why do you do that?
Yeah. I think, we even not only are we lacking a lot of just expressed affirmation and encouragement, we also are lacking real, gentle, kind rebuke, and correction. So instead, we just fill it with no affirmation and just joking criticisms or passive aggressive things. And, Proverbs says, open rebuke is better than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. So it actually gives this category of comparing open rebuke better than hidden love, which implies that open rebuke is really love gone public for someone. You're actually expressing love to give a godly rebuke of them. And it's a faithful wound because it's a wound of a friend. And the assumption is that's a friend loves you and they love you. And they're not just
Sure.
going to be criticizing you all the time. So, but we want to make each other better. We want to help each other. If you see someone and they're about to lead into a train wreck, you want to help them see that. Like I'm thankful for
Sure.
that friend of mine saying, "Hey, you're way too sarcastic and critical." That
Sure.
was an act of love for me. And so, but we've got to do that gently so people know we love them, so they're not defensive.
Sure.
Um, you know,
Yeah, and is there even practical wisdom in when to do that? Do you do it when you first meet someone? I know for me, I always think, oh, I really need to dial everything back until I understand how they're going to receive it. Because I know one of the criticisms that I get from my friends is, we can't tell when you're joking. And I'm thinking, oh man, that's not good. So it's like,
right?
how do I balance this? So I think I
Yeah.
found the quote you wrote. So in these turbulent moments, we need to remember above all else that our friend is our friend. And that was incredible because I had been doing that for weeks. I kept, when I would correct a friend, I would say, "Remember, this is your friend that you're speaking to."
Hmm.
So I wasn't overly critical or overly
Yeah.
harsh, and so that I created an environment where that was
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great advice. And I think um, it takes a while for someone to have trust and enough trust that you have their best in mind, that you do love them, that you're not just critical. And so that does take time, and it takes a lot of logged affirmation and encouragement. So, yeah, as people are becoming your friends, it can take a while before you've really earned the trust and the right
Sure.
to speak into their life in a way that they can hear and know that you care for them. But yeah, if you just quickly meet people and are just rebuking and rebuking and rebuking and saying criticisms, you can't be surprised if it's not landing well on people and people don't
Right.
actually helped by it, right?
Right.
But then when you're in the context of a friendship, you can be bothered by something, and it's really important to remember this is my friend. We have this history. I love them. They love me. So let me not overdo this. Let me be careful,
Sure.
and and trust the Lord to do it. I was just thinking about last week. The Apostle Paul writing to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:25, he says, correcting his opponents with gentleness, believing, and it says, knowing that God is the one who can change their hearts, right? They've been, in this case, they've been captured by Satan to do his will. But the point is, if God's the one who changes hearts, then you don't need to use the force of your personality to do it. You can just gently correct and trust the Lord to do the work.
Second Timothy 2:25 through 26, brother, that's awesome. That was my wallpaper for the past few months
Oh,
because I had
nice.
noticed that, and I had brought that up to one of my deacons. I said, somehow it says gentleness will lead a person to repentance. I don't understand that, but I'll try to do it.
Yeah.
But I think it goes to your point that that's probably our view of masculinity, that we just say it like it is, and we don't care if we
Hmm.
just met you.
Yeah.
We have no uh, fear that push you away. We say no, I just have to tell the truth regardless, because that's what men
Right.
do, and we kind of view it as a compromise to wait a while
Hmm.
to feel the person out before you give a
That's a great
correction.
point. That's a great point. And it seems like I've even heard people say, like, it's speaking the truth. It is what it is, right? It's true. It's true, right? And it's like, well, but we're called to speak the truth in love. And then I've heard other people say, well, it's the most loving thing to say what's true. And I'm like, I don't think that's the point, right? It's you speak the truth out of love, but then you do it in a loving way. And
Right.
so we just hold them both together. To do it gently and in love doesn't mean you don't you speak the truth. But then if you speak the truth, it doesn't mean that that's enough, right? We've got to care about both what's true and we've got to care about our tone.
Sure. So on page 34, because I want to think about now how we relate this to the church. You said, in
Mhm.
truth, the church with the deep community is likely a place in which each person goes deep with a handful of others. These are not isolated cliques, us four and no more, but overlapping networks of relationships. What do you mean by overlapping networks of relationships, and how do we kind of do that?
Yeah. So the idea is, we have the one another's in the New Testament. Forgive one another, bear one another's burdens, encourage one another, love one another. And in order for that to happen, and we also have Hebrews says, exhort one another every day, as long as it's called the day. So that assumes a daily kind of interaction, which means it's not just weekly, it's not just at a meeting, either Sunday morning or small group. There's got to be a relational dynamic where this is happening. But then when you step back and think, okay, let's say you're at a church of 200 or 800, can you do that with everybody?
Sure.
Really, just we can't, right? We have limitations of time, but then what do you do? And so I think the vision isn't that you necessarily given like these groups of like 5 people who turn inward, and then those are the only people who do that. It's you organically develop these friendships, and everyone may have 2 to 10 of these close friends in varying degrees, and they are able to bear each other's burdens. And then if everyone has those, they're going to have a different set of 2 to 10, but it'll be like a fabric. And so when you look at the whole community, you can pull on any thread and it's woven together with some other
Sure.
thread. And so there's this tight knit network where everyone
Sure.
has friends. It's not necessarily all the same ones, nor is it just kind of clicky. So that
Sure.
if anything happens in someone's life, everyone will have a few people that know them well that can encourage them.
Sure. So talk about this from the origins, or from Genesis, because
Mhm.
I try to explain this to some Christians, even looking at Hebrews 3. But some people have a difficult time picturing it, probably because it's not spoken of so frequently. So how do you show someone from the Bible that this is actually necessary?
Yeah. Yeah. So Genesis is a great place to go because when God created Adam and Eve, he did it in a process. And so you have Genesis 1, he's creating the world, and it says repeatedly, and God saw it, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. And then the last one said it was very good. And that was after he created Adam and Eve and called them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So when you have 2 people with a commission to spread society, then it's very good. Then in Genesis 2, it actually zooms into how that day 6 happened with Adam and Eve created. And in the process of it, it says he started with Adam, and this striking statement's made before Eve's made. Adam's there, and it says, and it was not good that the man was alone.
Okay.
And um, I don't think that can be limited to just he needed a spouse, but it's he needed community, he needed a friend. Marriage is a primary way in which friendship is met, but it's that marriage to create a society of friendship for the fruitful and multiplying to happen. And so there's God Himself saying to Adam, and this is what was striking to me. The next chapter is when sin enters the world, right?
Sure.
But in Genesis 2, before sin's in the world, Adam is perfect. He has the Lord. He's in paradise. But because he's alone, God says it's not good, which doesn't
Sure.
mean that God failed. It just means his work was not yet complete. And if it's
Sure.
not yet complete and someone's alone, it's not good. So that just shows that from the very beginning, the way we're made, it's not good that we're alone. We need relationships. We need community, and that can be found in marriage, but it doesn't have to be found in marriage. But we need
Sure.
we need close friendship.
Sure. So you also say on to talk about your last point. You said on page 100. Here's another myth about friendship. We can have a lot of very close friends, and I thought that was interesting. So while that may be obvious for some, is certainly not for all. So, how do you encourage someone, or can you give a word of encouragement for someone who is looking to, they're looking at their church, or they're looking at a school, and they want to be friends with everyone. They have this
Yeah.
longing to do that, but they realize, man, this is not happening and it's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. I think at one level, there's something encouraging, or it's good news that it just is impossible. We have limitations. We're time bound. We're bound physically, and so you just can't have close friendships with everyone because it takes time, it takes shared experience, it takes conversation. So that can be freeing to just know it's actually impossible. So, even in a school or even a local church saying like, I need to know everybody. It's like, you just can't, and the
Right.
Lord doesn't expect you to. And so that's freeing. But then the next thing is that you don't need to feel bad then, but it's hopeful because it says, well, what does the Lord call me to then? Well, He calls me to be friendly to everyone, and there can be different levels of friendship. But I don't need to share, do the one on the one another's and share my deepest life with more than a few, because that's just the way He made us. And so then that's hopeful
Sure.
to say, okay, Lord, help me pursue a few people. Please, bless my efforts to befriend them. And then it can still be hard because there's an art to friendship, and you may
Sure.
not the person may not reciprocate with you, but at least it's freeing to know that you don't need to do it with everyone, but you can do it with a few.
Sure. So that leads me to my next question. What do you say to someone who is attempting to build good friendships with people in their community, but the relationships are not reciprocal? It's like, man, I'm trying this, and I find myself in this situation a lot. I'm trying it, it's not working. I'm
Yeah.
trying to do this, and there could be many reasons as to why. But what would you say some of the reasons are?
Yeah, and you're right. There could be a lot of reasons. So you don't need to jump too quickly to say what's wrong with me, right? Nor that everyone else has a moral issue, right? It could just be that the community you're in, for various reasons, doesn't value friendship accordingly yet, and maybe they need to, right? Because this has been a gap in our culture, relationships, and so people don't yet value it. So if you're seeing the value of it, there's a patience then that you may need for other people and help people value it, and thinking about it together. And it's also that the community you're in the structure of their lives may work against it. You could be at a church, for instance, that really emphasizes coming to the building a few times a week, and then people are busy in life, and then there's not much space in people's lives to open themselves up to other relationships. And so that just takes time to help people rethink their schedules, for it as well. And it could just be that, yeah, the people you've talked to, it just isn't a good season of life, or it's not a fit, and then you just need to
Sure.
have flexibility and patience and keep trying. And I think the two pieces of advice that I think of when I think of that kind of situation is, one, to pray, because the Lord made you for it, and He can
Sure.
provide a friend. And so don't neglect just asking Him to bring you a good friend and bless your efforts. And then the second is just focus mainly on being a good friend rather
Sure.
than finding a good friend, and look for the lonely person in the room to encourage, because sometimes when we have on our mind, I've got to find a friend, we're already subconsciously weeding out certain people that we don't really want to be friends with, and we're pursuing others, and it's not working. But actually,
Sure.
there probably are other people in your community that feel the same way you do, and would actually be really blessed if they had you encourage them and get some time with them. And maybe they won't become your friend, but you're at least expressing friendship, and maybe the Lord would turn something into that.
Sure. So now you mentioned that there may be some people who are feeling lonely. How do you identify those people? Because not everyone expresses it the same way.
Yeah, that's true. So one way is you literally can just have a mindset to when you walk into a room with a gathering, you just look around with that in mind. And it's amazing how, at least in my experience, when I walk into a room and I have this actually on my mind, is there someone not connecting with people here? Is there someone by themselves? Is there someone who may look excluded from a conversation? Like, they're around. We're just our minds just filled with other things, and we're worried about who's going to talk to me, and am I going to have anyone to talk to in this gathering? So I think just looking for it. And then the second thing would be to ask deeper questions in life and conversation, right? Because
Sure.
conversations can be, as men and women, but I think just as a man, it certainly happens. It just stays superficial on sports and just kind of what's happening in life, rather than saying like, how are you doing? What's this past week been
Right.
like for you? What's been challenging? And then as you go deeper in conversation, just ask more important questions like that. Then you find out, oh, they're really like they're discouraged. Oh, they don't actually have
Sure.
any in their life. Oh man, they really could use someone to reach out to them or something. And so, but that's not going to come up if you're only talking about the superficial topic.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, so that's interesting. So I just have a question about applying this to unbelievers.
Yeah,
How do we apply this to befriending people who are not Christians?
yeah. Well, I think it's important to, right? Because we're made for friendship. Everyone is, and I think it's really helpful to think about friendships as you can think of it as concentric circles. You know, like you have the closest friends, and then a circle outward is other maybe casual friends, and then outside of that might be acquaintances, or you can think of like lanes. So lanes of a highway. So over here on the right lane, that's really congested. A lot of people you know. You might call them friends, but you don't ever actually hang out with them.
Sure.
Middle lanes are casual friends. Left lane is the closest friends. I think with people who don't know Jesus and you do, they can be your friends at those levels. But when you become a Christian, it's almost like another lane opens up and you have a new friend in Jesus. Your worldview is changing, and the things that are most significant to you have changed. And so, really, only other Christians can share that kind of bond and closeness and depth of relationship. And so, your closest friends then will be and should be friends, but you can still have, or will be Christians, but you can still have close friends and casual friends who aren't. And I think
Sure.
that Jesus even modeled that, right? Inviting
Sure.
people in. His closest friends, you know, James, John, Peter were close disciples, but people were in all sorts of close proximity with him and cared for by him. So I think it's definitely a both and here. And then the great hope would be that those who aren't friends of Jesus, that by becoming our friends and meeting other friends who are Christians of ours, they might know Jesus as a friend as well. And then they could become even closer there.
Sure. So now, okay. So the last thing you mentioned was trying to get deeper in conversations. How
Yeah.
do we organically do that? Because you can be in a situation where it's just not the right time, but you're longing to know the person. And you're like, okay, how do I do this? How do I ask, how are you? Or
Hmm.
how do you do that organically?
Yeah. That's good. I think for me, find like having a few go-to questions that are just things you're curious about and that take things deeper would be really helpful. And then after you ask them, just staying curious and listening well. I think we need to develop the skill of being curious about what other people are saying rather than just needing to get my point in or say something. We're a little more curious about expressing ourselves and then just
Right.
listening well. But the starting point's those questions. So I think thinking through what are questions that you think would be helpful to ask people. For me, I usually ask, how are you doing these days? Really simple way to put it, but it's different than just saying what's going on or what's up. It makes people think, yeah, how am I doing at a deeper level these days? It kind of gets specific. It's hard right now, or I can give even more specific, like, hey, is there anything, what's been encouraging to you lately, or is there anything that's been really discouraging? That can be asked in a stiff, formal way, like, tell me what's encouraging lately. But there's also a really natural way. You could just say, hey, I'm curious, like, how are you doing? Has there been something exciting or something really getting you down? That question really gets into what really moves the emotions of people through a day and some of the deepest stuff in life. So for me, those are my key questions at first. And then I'll also ask, if I know they're a reader, what are you reading these days?
Ah,
And if they're a Christian, are you reading anything in God's word these days that's been encouraging? Um,
sure.
and or what's been on your mind these days, or this past week. That just it's telling people you care about what's on their mind and heart,
Sure.
and it opens conversation. Then it's just, yeah, stay curious, listen, ask follow-up questions. Don't be afraid to share things from your own life, even if they don't ask.
Sure.
Don't dominate the conversation.
Sure. And one of the things I do is ask, what can I pray for you about?
That's great. Yeah.
And that's a great way I find to begin to learn more about the person, but to also care for the person so that you begin to create an environment by which the person feels comfortable with you and expressing things. Because I've seen talking to people, and I was reading a book earlier this year. I believe it was called. what was it called, untangling emotions, and he brought up, there could be people amongst your you know your inner circle, and you don't even know what they're going through, and then when they tell you one day what they're going through, it's like, man, I know these people, but I
Mm.
don't know them. I don't really know what's happening in their life. I don't know anything about them other than they like the Jets or the Giants or the Yankees. And so I think that's very interesting. So I think to wrap this up, I want to ask a question about God as the
Yeah.
ultimate friend. And so what consolation can he offer to those who do not experience these friendships?
Yeah. Well, first of all, know that you're not alone in that, right? This world is broken, and it's relationally broken, and sin makes relationships hard, and there's all sorts of awkwardness. So you may feel alone in having trouble with friendships, but you're not. So many people feel this way, even if it doesn't look like it on their faces and in social gatherings. So I think that's even just encouraging. I think knowing that, and so I mean, this is first not just practical, just knowing how to think about it. The other thing is that God made you for it. So it means that if you feel lonely, it's not because something's wrong with you most deeply, but because something's right with you. Like God made you for friendship. So if you feel this longing, that's a sign of your dignity. So just be encouraged. And then the deepest encouragement, though, is that even if every friend fails you, or you fail to have good friends right now and close friends, Jesus himself came to restore you into friendship with himself and the triune God. And so, he defined the cross as an act of friendship. He said, greater love has no one than this, that a man lay his life down for his friends.
That's
You
awesome.
are my friends. Yeah. So what I think is so amazing there is he's telling his disciples, his followers, how to think of the cross that very night, really the next day.
Sure.
And he wants them to think about when they see Jesus on the cross, to think he's he's loving me personally on terms of friendship. And he's doing
Sure.
it so that my sin can be forgiven and I can be restored to him in friendship. And he is the greatest friend. So that means it's not just an abstract idea, like really, like this very moment, if you trust in Jesus as your savior and your friend, like he loves you, he accepts you, he's with
Sure.
you, you can talk to him, he'll never let you down, he's open with you, you can hear him speak to you through the word. And that's just the deepest comfort, then, to know that God himself is with you.
Sure.
So um,
Well,
yeah.
brother, I appreciate you bringing up the fact that it's inherent within the design, because I can do this, and I've seen other Christians do this, where depending on their theological slants to certain things, and maybe they don't believe prayer is as effective as one other person believes, and they may think something's wrong with me. Why am I doing this? What's happening here? Maybe I shouldn't have said this. And you
Hmm.
think, no, that was an appropriate question. It just didn't work out in this case.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think too, for some reason recently, I've just been more encouraged by this thought that because God made it for us, and I think just the more you think about friendship, the more you value it, also the more just discouraging it can be with how it's just hard, both because of sin and just personality. And so I'm looking forward to the new creation because our friend is going to come, Jesus, and restore all things, and all of his friends will be with him and one another in new creation. And not only will the sin be gone, but also just those weird social awkwardnesses that are tainted with sin and foolishness, and um, trying to get over past hurt and all of that. Like, I'm just so looking forward to that. So it's great that we can get some of that now, but it's hopeful that our frustrations now will have a sense of fulfillment and friendship in the new creation.
Sure. Do you mind if I ask you just one more question
Yeah.
about what you just said? What advice would you give to someone who may have had good friendships, and then they went sour, and they're very embittered toward getting close to people, and so they say, "I'm going to be distant
Yeah.
because the last time I got close to someone, it hurt. They betrayed me. They walked away from this relationship." What advice do you give to someone? How can they come out of that sort of thinking and walk into new friendships? Because a lot of times, like you said earlier, that when you think about who's lonely, who can be my friend, who can I be friends with, you're already selecting people, and you're doing the very thing. You're excluding others who may really want to be your
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah. Yeah. I think at one level, that is a real concern and challenge. That hurt can be really deep, but it doesn't negate the very things we talked about, which is you're made for friendship. The Lord can heal and provide, and it's worth it. So it's worth trying again. So I think that's part of it, is just not letting that past hurt um, trump the true value of it. And then I think recognizing that the Lord Jesus knows what that's like. He was betrayed by Judas. Um, I have been such a fickle friend to him. And yet he keeps being patient. He keeps pursuing. And so I think receiving that from him, just acknowledging that we have been that to people in the Lord, and knowing how
Sure.
kind and faithful he is, just receive that, and then let the Spirit help you express that to others, I think is
Sure.
part of it. And then, yeah, just like Paul says in Galatians, don't grow weary in doing good. The sense is, don't grow weary in pursuing this. Pray that the Lord would help you. And maybe there's a reconciliation needed in that past friendship. Maybe you just need to talk to them about it, but it can also be time kind of just say, I
Sure.
have to leave that behind and start afresh.
You
Um,
know,
yeah,
I was going to say, brother, that's such an important point, because I was talking to a relative of mine who's a Christian, and she had been so hurt by relationships. And when I said, hey, you should just keep pursuing